Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the secret misery of being a medieval queen, the part Hollywood forgot to mention because, endless suffering doesn't sell as well as sparkly tiaras. Forget the sweeping gowns, the castle banquets, and the handsome knights who apparently have nothing better to do than gaze at you all day. The truth? Being a queen in the Middle Ages was less royal fairy tale and more glorified prisoner in a drafty stone Airbnb with zero heating, no privacy, and political murder as a common workplace hazard. So before you imagine yourself waltzing through a candlelit hall, hit that like button, subscribe for more historical reality checks, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from so I can see which one of you would have frozen first in a 14th century castle. Now dim the lights, grab a blanket, trust me you'll need it, and let's jump in. You wake up, not in a king-size bed in fact, not even in your own bed half the time, because queens were often moved around for security or political reasons. The sheets, rough wool, itchy as your aunt's holiday sweater. The room smells like, well, a combination of unwashed stone, stale rushes on the floor, and the faint whiff of last night's chamber pot. Oh, and no, you don't get to leave whenever you want. You're technically the most important woman in the realm, but also the most valuable hostage. Congratulations. And before breakfast, you're already under surveillance. Maids, ladies-in-waiting, and a couple of suspicious guards all watching, all reporting back to someone. Imagine living with your own personal group chat, except instead of memes, they're sharing every move you make with the king's advisors. You're thinking pancakes? Nope. Welcome to bread that could double as a weapon, cold ale, maybe a hunk of cheese if you're lucky, and you eat with an audience because queens rarely dined alone. Privacy is for peasants, apparently. Oh, by the way, that bread, your teeth are your most valuable asset right now. Dental care is non-existent. Ever tried to chew on something harder than your hopes and dreams? That's medieval breakfast. Now that you've survived breakfast without breaking a molar, let's talk politics. Being queen isn't just about wearing pretty gowns. It's about producing heirs. And if you think that sounds romantic, remember, this isn't date night. This is a high-stakes breeding program for the survival of dynasties. And if you don't produce an heir, or worse, produce the wrong one, you might get blamed for everything from poor harvests to bad weather. Oh, and your replacement could already be waiting in the wings. Fun. Yes, your dresses are beautiful. They're also heavy, expensive, and designed more for politics than comfort. They tell the world you're wealthy, powerful, and completely immobile. Need to run? Not happening. Want to blend in? Forget it. It's like wearing a wedding dress every single day, except instead of celebrating love, you're constantly negotiating alliances, dodging assassinations, and trying not to faint from heat exhaustion under 10 layers of fabric. Even as queen, your life is never safe. If the king dies suddenly, you might be accused of poisoning him. If a rebellion breaks out, you could be blamed for witchcraft or treachery. Being royal means having your name on everything, including the wanted list. And medieval justice. Let's just say you really don't want to find yourself on trial. There's no Netflix documentary to clear your name, just some guy in a robe deciding if you live or die. You retreat to your chambers. The torches flicker. You hear the sound of boots in the hallway. Could be a guard, could be someone delivering news, could be someone delivering poison. You're not sure which is worse. Outside, the world is quiet. Inside, your head is full of what-ifs. Will you be sent away in exile? Will tomorrow bring peace or war? And will anyone ever remember you for you, or just for who you married and what heirs you produced? You think your schedule is yours. Oh no. Your day is carved into an endless procession of ceremonies and audiences. Morning mass, midday audiences, afternoon progressions through the courts so people can see your face and whisper behind your back. It's basically medieval Instagram, except the comments aren't hidden. They're whispered 3 feet away from you by people who curtsy with one hand and sharpen daggers with the other. You must smile just right, not too happy. That makes you look frivolous. But not too solemn. That makes you look bitter. And for the love of St. Catherine, don't sneeze. In the medieval mind, that could mean anything from she's cursed to she's carrying the plague. If you think you can trust anyone, Welcome to the court's favorite pastime, betrayal. Your ladies in waiting, they might be sending coded letters to the king's enemies. Your confessor, the one person you think might understand your struggles, he could be feeding every word back to the archbishop, who in turn feeds it to your husband. And the spy master, he's everywhere. You spot him at feasts, at hunts, even slipping out of the servants' quarters at dawn. You don't know whose side he's on, but you do know this. Say the wrong thing, and it will be on the king's desk before sunset. It's a bit like living in a reality TV show where the cameras never stop rolling, except instead of being voted off, you might be exiled, imprisoned, or if things get really spicy, executed. Being queen doesn't mean romance. It means strategy. Your marriage bed is a political chessboard. Every smile, every glance, every refusal carries meaning. If the king is in a good mood, maybe you get extra influence. If he's in a bad mood, you might lose your allies overnight. And there's no saying, "I'm not in the mood." Your personal feelings are irrelevant when the stability of a kingdom depends on your womb. Oh, and don't forget the gossip. If you're seen speaking to another man too warmly, that's instantly evidence of adultery. If you're not seen speaking to anyone, you're cold or prideful. Basically, you're starring in the medieval version of a tabloid scandal that never ends. Let's say you've done the impossible. You've given birth to a healthy heir. Congrats, your job is still not over. Now you have to make sure the spare, the second child, exists because medieval life expectancy is a cruel joke. But here's the twist. If your heir dies, you get blamed. If your heir survives, you might still be blamed for favoring one child over the other. And God help you if your son turns out rebellious or your daughter's marriage alliance fails. It's all your fault, somehow. Every public appearance is an opportunity to cement alliances or accidentally destroy them. You wear jewels gifted by one lord, another lord takes offense. You greet one foreign envoy first, another envoy sends home a report that you're biased. And because this is the Middle Ages, there's always a saint's feast day, a royal christening, or a coronation anniversary. That means endless hours of standing in drafty cathedrals while monks chant in Latin so slowly you're convinced time has actually stopped. In winter, your breath fogs the air inside your bedchamber. In summer, the damp stone walls still manage to chill you. Layers of fur and velvet help, but they also trap sweat, dust, and the faint smell of smoke from the great hall fires. And forget cozy fireplaces in every room. Most heat comes from one or two massive hearths. And if you're not right in front of them, you might as well be in the courtyard. You can't talk openly about your health, but trust me, the medieval queen's body takes a beating. Childbirth? Extremely dangerous. Infections? Common. Cures often involve things like drinking wine boiled with herbs and a dash of powdered pearl. And because you're royalty, you get the best medical care, which often means more bloodletting and more leeches than anyone else. Lucky you. Meanwhile, you're surrounded by servants and courtiers, coughing in the hallways, sneezing in the kitchens, and bringing news from towns where disease is running rampant. Hand sanitizer, please. The closest thing you have is a sprig of rosemary to sniff. Ironically, you're never truly alone yet constantly lonely. Every conversation has layers. What's said, what's meant, and what's reported. You can't drop your guard even for a second. Your letters are intercepted. Your friends' political risks. Even your own family might be pawns in the king's next diplomatic game. You might be surrounded by hundreds of people every day and still have no one you can trust. When the king invites you to the hunt, it's not for fun. It's another political performance. You're expected to ride gracefully, look suitably impressed at every stag, and pretend you don't notice the whispered conversations between nobles when you lag behind. If you fall from your horse, you're weak. If you keep up too well, you're unladylike. And if you show any hesitation, well, that's another rumor for the court to feast on. As darkness falls, the real games begin. The private dinners, the whispered conversations in candlelit chambers, the subtle handshakes that seal agreements you're not even told about. If you're lucky, you get to overhear enough to protect yourself. If not, tomorrow's news might be your downfall. And you'll hear it secondhand at breakfast from someone smiling just a little too much. You'd think clothes would be the fun part. Wrong. Every gown you own is a political statement sewn in silk. That gold thread embroidery on your sleeve? It better match your current alliances, wear the wrong color on the wrong day, and suddenly you're secretly supporting your husband's enemies. And fittings? Endless. Stand still for hours while someone pins velvet to you like you're a human pincushion. And because fashion is as much about intimidation as beauty, the more elaborate the gown, the better, which means heavier, hotter, harder to breathe. By the end of a feast, you've sweated through layers worth more than most people's houses. Being queen comes with gentle suggestions from courtiers that you should commission poetry, music, and religious paintings. Refuse and you look stingy. Agree, and you bleed the treasury dry funding some monk's lifetime supply of gold leaf. You can't just sponsor what you like either. Every choice has to flatter the right noble family or religious order. You end up pretending to adore a mural of Saint whoever, while silently wondering why his face looks suspiciously like the king's cousin. Every prayer you say is watched. Every donation to a monastery is measured. Favor one bishop too much? The other factions will mutter that you're meddling in holy affairs. Skip too many vigils? Suddenly you're lukewarm in faith, which in the Middle Ages is one slippery step away from heretic. And church services are long. Imagine standing for hours on cold flagstones while incense smoke fills your nose and your knees tremble, pretending to be moved by chants you've heard 10,000 times. Writing letters might seem like a safe escape, a little slice of privacy, but here, ink is as dangerous as poison. Every word can be twisted. Every message might be intercepted. You start writing in carefully vague phrases, so vague you're not even sure what you meant when you read them back later. And if you accidentally offend a noble by leaving them off your greeting list, you'll hear about it for months in the form of, "Oh, I'm sure Her Grace simply forgot." They never forget. Sometimes the king heads off to war or to visit a hunting lodge for weeks. The moment he's gone, the vultures circle. Every noble wants your ear, your approval, your promise, because with the king away, you're a temporary gateway to power. But here's the trick. Help the wrong person, and when the king returns, you'll be accused of scheming against him. Do nothing, and you're useless. Either way, you lose. Medieval festivals are not cute little maypole dances. They're sprawling, sweaty, chaotic events where you're expected to smile at thousands of people while trying not to get elbowed by a drunk knight or sprayed with spit by an overenthusiastic bard. Until you're on your feet for hours, surrounded by the smell of roasting meat, wet dogs, spilled ale, and unwashed bodies pressed in tight. And of course, you must pretend you love every minute because festivals are for the people. The castle's library sounds romantic parchment scrolls, illuminated manuscripts, maybe a quiet reading nook. Reality check. The room is freezing, the candles drip wax on your sleeves, and half the books are written in Latin, so dense it feels like a punishment. You'd like to read for pleasure, but even that's political. Show too much interest in certain texts, and you're dabbling in philosophy, dangerous. Show too little interest, and you're unlearned, also dangerous. The servants keep the court running, but they also control your mood without even trying. If they decide you've offended them, maybe you scolded someone for spilling wine, suddenly the bathwater is too cold, the food is too salty, and your favorite gown takes weeks to repair. You can't call them out directly because that looks petty. So you smile, thank them sweetly, and pray they get bored of their passive-aggressive campaign before winter sets in. Rumors in court spread faster than plague. One day you're the most gracious queen in Christendom. The next someone claims you bewitched the king, poisoned the duke's dog, and kicked a nun. The worst part? You can't defend yourself directly. It's unbecoming. You must rely on carefully placed allies to gently correct the gossip, which usually just makes people more curious. Hosting foreign envoys sounds glamorous until you're stuck through a 5-hour dinner smiling at someone who keeps trying to negotiate trade tariffs between bites of eel pie. Every toast is a trap. Drink too much, you're a lush. Drink too little, you're ungrateful. And you have to pretend you adore every dish, even the one that's basically fermented fish in a pastry coffin. There are wars. No one talks about the cold, smiling rivalries between noblewomen. Dresses copied, glances exchanged, gifts given with double meanings. It's not about armies, it's about influence. And losing can mean watching your allies vanish one by one while someone else becomes the king's most trusted advisor. You can't win with brute force, only patience, charm, and the occasional well-timed absence. The castle is quieter now, but the night isn't peaceful. You hear footsteps in the hallway, voices muffled behind doors. Somewhere a dog barks sharply, then stops. You sit by the window, the cold stone biting through your gown, looking out at the dark countryside. Out there are peasants who think your life is golden. In here is the truth, a crown that weighs more than its gold, a cage lined with velvet. And morning will come again. There are nights when you manage to win the battle for comfort. Tonight is one of them. The servants have piled the hearth with enough logs to make the fire roar. You sit close, toes curled against a fur rug, so soft it feels like it's stolen from a dream. Outside, the wind screams against the tower walls, but in here it's all warm shadows and flickering gold. On a small table beside you, a silver goblet of hot spiced wine, cinnamon, cloves, and a hint of honey just sweet enough to make the cold feel like a story you heard once, not something breathing outside your window. Most of the library is too public for peace, but there's a hidden alcove in your private chambers, a deep stone window seat piled with cushions embroidered in gold thread. You curl there at night with a single candle and a book bound in soft leather. The pages smell faintly of smoke and lavender, the work of some long-dead scribe who poured months into each letter. Tonight, it's a romance from centuries ago, the kind that feels reckless to read, but thrilling to imagine. Outside, snow falls in silence. Inside, you trace the painted illuminations with your fingertip, their blues and reds bright even in the candle's weak glow. When the frost finally melts, you steal hours in the walled garden. It's not grand, just a cluster of flowering herbs, roses tangled against the stone, and a bench where the sun finds you even in the early morning chill. The air smells of damp earth and rosemary. Bees hum lazily among the blossoms. You remove your shoes, pressing your bare feet into the grass just to remember what it feels like to be grounded. No courtiers, no politics. Just birdsong, warmth on your cheeks, and the sound of a fountain trickling over moss. It's the one acceptable hobby that also feels like a shield. You sit in the great solar with a hoop of linen stretched between your hands, stitching gold and scarlet thread into a pattern of leaves. It looks like you're quietly working, and you are, but it also gives you an excuse not to meet anyone's eyes, to let conversations float past without demanding a response. The gentle pull of the needle, the soft hiss of thread against fabric, the faint warmth from the nearby brazier. It's a rhythm you can lose yourself in. Bathing is rare, but when you can claim it, it's an event. Servants carry heated water in great steaming buckets to fill a deep wooden tub lined with linen. You sink in until the warmth swallows you whole. Floating herbs perfume the air, mint sage, maybe a touch of rose. The room is lit with dozens of candles, their flames shivering on the water's surface. For an hour, no one can hand you a letter, deliver news, or ask for your signature. It's just you, the water, and the sound of your own breathing. Some nights when the court sleeps, a trusted maid slips in with a covered dish, a gift from the kitchen. Tonight, it's warm honey cakes dusted with crushed almonds, their sweetness melting into the quiet like a secret. You eat them slowly, perched by the window, watching the moonlight frost the rooftops below. It feels almost dangerous, not because of the food, but because of the freedom to have something that's just yours, unshared and unjudged. You've kept a small group of musicians who know how to play softly enough that the sound stays in your rooms. Lute, harp, and a low, breathy flute. The kind of music that makes shadows sway like they're dancing with each other. You close your eyes and lean back in your chair, letting the notes blur into dreams of far-off summers. Sometimes they play old songs from your childhood. Sometimes new melodies written just for you, though you'll never know whether they're truly original or stolen from some troubadour 3 kingdoms away. On certain winter nights, your ladies-in-waiting gather in your private solar. There's embroidery and mending, yes, but also gossip, the harmless kind. about weather and children and distant relatives. The air is thick with the scent of beeswax and wood smoke. The only sounds are the click of needles, the whisper of fabric, and the occasional burst of quiet laughter. For a few hours, the world feels smaller, gentler. He's not yours. Officially, cats belong to no one, but he's decided your chambers are part of his territory. A sleek, gray Tom who appears without warning, curling up on your lap like he's been invited. You stroke his fur, feel the steady purr rumble against your palm. In a place where every word is overheard, his company is blissfully silent. When the cold months stretch long, you take to walking the covered gallery that leads to the watchtower. Wrapped in a cloak lined with fox fur, you watch the sun drop behind the hills, painting the sky in bruised purple and gold. The guards bow as you pass, but they don't speak. For once, the silence isn't heavy. It's clean, crisp, edged with the scent of wood smoke drifting up from the village below. It's technically the servants' work, but you sometimes join them in the kitchens on bread baking days. The air is warm, heavy with the scent of yeast and roasting crusts. You roll dough on a floured table while women chatter around you, their voices overlapping like music. Later, you take a loaf still hot from the oven, tear it open, and let the steam curl against your face. It's not fancy food, but it feels more royal than any jeweled banquet dish. The winter sky had dulled into a heavy pewter, clouds sagging low over the valley, as if ready to spill secrets along with snow. Inside the small, timber-framed inn, the fire whispered in the hearth, its light flickering across worn beams and the soft, uneven plaster walls. The scent of spiced cider lingered in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of baking bread drifting in from the kitchen. Elara sat at the far end of the common room, her chair angled toward the fire, a knitted shawl pulled close around her shoulders. She had always felt safest here, among the creaks of the floorboards, the warmth of the embers, and the quiet hum of other patrons who seemed content to mind their own affairs. But tonight, something felt different. The door had opened only moments ago, letting in a gust of cold that snuffed a few candles and made the flames in the hearth dance wildly. A man stepped in, snow dusting his boots in the fur trim of his cloak. He did not shake it off, nor greet anyone. His eyes, sharp, restless, swept the room once before he moved to a corner table. The innkeeper, old Tom, greeted him with the same genial tone he offered to everyone, but the stranger only nodded and murmured for hot wine. Elara found her gaze drawn back to him over and over, though she pretended to watch the fire. He had the sort of presence that made the air feel heavier, like a weight resting on the room. The other patrons seemed to notice too. The usual murmur of conversation had thinned to quiet sentences spoken in low tones. Outside, the snow began to fall harder, a hush settling over the village. The windows fogged over, blurring the outlines of lantern-lit streets. Inside, the fire's crackle became the loudest sound. Then, from the direction of the kitchen, came a soft thud. Not the kind of thud one hears when a loaf of bread is set on a counter or a pot is placed on a shelf, but sharper, more deliberate. The innkeeper paused mid-step. So did the man in the corner. For a moment, the whole room seemed to be holding its breath. Tom moved to investigate, vanishing through the archway to the back. Elara, curiosity prickling at her, shifted in her seat to glance after him. The stranger, however, simply reached for his cup of steaming wine, though she noticed his grip tighten the handle. Minutes passed. The door to the kitchen remained closed. A faint draft seemed to whisper through the room, carrying with it the scent of something metallic. Faint, but unmistakable. The stranger's gaze flicked to the window, then to the hearth, and finally settled, just for a heartbeat, on Elara. That single look carried something she could not name. Not menace, not familiarity, but an unspoken acknowledgement, as if they were both suddenly aware of something the others were not. And then, without warning, the fire sputtered and dimmed, as though some unseen hand had cupped it. The inn, once a refuge from the cold, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage, and the play had just taken a turn no one had rehearsed. A sudden stillness settled over the narrow lanes of the village that night, as though the air itself had been warned to hold its breath. The usual chorus of creaking shutters and the muffled clatter from hearths seemed to vanish, replaced by the faint patter of rain striking uneven cobblestones. The tavern's fire had burned low, and only a few stubborn embers glowed in the grate. From the window, one could see the fog rolling in from the river, curling like ghostly fingers between the cottages, and wrapping itself around the old stone well at the square center. Eleanor tightened her woolen shawl as she stepped into the night. The rain had soaked through the fabric, and its chill made her shiver, but she wasn't walking home. Not yet. There had been talk, hushed and uncertain, of a shadow lingering near the abandoned chapel beyond the mill. Several villagers swore they had seen a lantern swaying there in the late hours, though no one admitted to venturing close enough to confirm. It was the sort of thing that might have been dismissed as idle gossip on any other evening. But tonight, the village felt watched. The path to the chapel was overgrown, the earth soft and treacherous from the rain. The tall grass brushed against her skirts, leaving cold droplets clinging to the fabric. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, low and deliberate, its cry echoing in the mist. Eleanor's boots sank slightly with each step, the mud reluctant to release her. She passed the weathered fence post where wild rose brambles curled around the wood like silent sentries. The chapel appeared at first as a dark smudge in the fog, its crooked spire just visible against the pale glow of the moon. The structure was older than the village itself, its roof sagging under centuries of neglect. The once bright stained glass had long since shattered, leaving only jagged fragments like teeth in an open mouth. And there, just as the whispers had claimed, a faint light moved inside, swaying as though held by a hand. She approached the doorway, her breath clouding the air. The heavy wooden door hung slightly ajar, its iron hinges streaked with rust. The scent of damp stone and something faintly metallic drifted out to meet her. She pushed the door slowly, the groan of wood carrying far in the silence. Inside, the chapel was colder than the night air, the kind of chill that seeped into bone. A single lantern rested on the cracked altar, its flame trembling. Beside it lay a leather-bound book, its cover warped and darkened by time. Eleanor hesitated. She knew she should turn back, return to the safety of her own hearth. But curiosity was stronger than fear. She stepped forward and brushed her fingers over the cover. The leather was damp, but warm, as though it had been touched only moments ago. She opened it. The ink was faded, the script written in a looping, unfamiliar hand. At first, the words seemed ordinary. Dates, accounts of weather, notes on harvests. But the further she turned the pages, the stranger they became. Mentions of watchers in the fog, warnings to avoid the riverbank after dusk, repeated references to the seventh night, always written in a heavier, almost frantic hand. Eleanor froze as she noticed a detail in the margin, a small, precise sketch of the village square, each cottage drawn with meticulous care. At the very center, by the old stone well, a dark mark had been inked, like a shadow cast by something that wasn't there. A noise behind her, a soft shuffle, like cloth brushing against stone, made her turn sharply. The doorway was empty, the mist pressed against the broken windows, curling inward. And then she saw it, a shape at the far corner of the chapel, standing so still it might have been part of the wall. It was draped in something dark, the outline impossible to read through the shifting light. The lantern flame flickered violently, casting quick, disjointed shadows across the cracked walls. Eleanor's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She took a step backward, her heel catching on uneven stone. The figure didn't move, at least not until the wind hissed through the doorway and the pages of the book snapped shut on their own. The figure's head tilted, slow, deliberate. And somewhere deep within the chapel, something began to whisper. The night in Elderglen had grown impossibly still. Even the owl that usually called from the twisted oak by the mill seemed to have decided silence was wiser. Somewhere in the narrow lanes, a single lantern swayed gently from a crooked beam, creaking like a hesitant breath. The air had that damp, mossy smell that clung to your clothes. the kind that made you wish for a thicker blanket and a locked door. In the warmth of Marlowe's bakery, the fire in the great oven had long since died, leaving only faint orange ghosts in the embers. Yet the place smelled too warm, like fresh bread, though none had been baked since morning. A few villagers swore they'd seen the baker himself pass by the square an hour ago, even though everyone knew he'd gone to bed early after complaining of a headache. His old black apron now hung from a chair, but the sleeves were damp, as if he'd been kneading dough in the dark. Meanwhile, at the village well, Thomas, our reliable, stooped waterkeeper, was pacing in slow circles. He claimed the water had taken on a taste of iron, though no one else seemed brave enough to test it. The bucket rope was wet, but the ground around the well was bone dry, as if the water had been hauled and poured away, not spilled. Every so often, Thomas stopped and peered into the depths, lips moving silently, as though arguing with something down there. Back at the tavern, the usual comfort of cider mugs and roasted chestnuts was undercut by a strange draft that seemed to come from nowhere. The hearth was roaring, yet a chill brushed against ankles like the sweep of a cold skirt. A chessboard sat abandoned mid-game on a corner table. Black was winning, but no one could remember who had been playing. The white king had been tipped over, not toppled, and beside it lay a sprig of rosemary, green and damp, like it had been plucked only moments before from the gardens that now slept under frost. And then there was the knock. 3 soft, deliberate knocks, carried across the square like the sound of wood against wet cloth. Not at any one door, but every door at once, as if the village itself were being addressed. The sound was slow enough that you might have convinced yourself it was only the wind, except for the pause after each one, as if waiting for a reply. The cats scattered. The dogs did not bark. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to shrink, as though reluctant to be noticed. In that heavy stillness, the air shifted, subtly, almost sweetly. A smell of spiced honey drifted in from nowhere, wrapping itself around the lanes, coaxing people toward the square. One by one, doors cracked open just enough for a single eye to peek out. Those who stepped into the cold swore they saw the faint outline of a figure moving between the shadows, not walking, not gliding, but slipping from one patch of darkness to the next, the way ink spreads when it touches wet paper. The figure never turned, but it left something behind at every doorstep, a small clay cup filled with a dark, steaming liquid that smelled faintly of cinnamon and something older, earthier. Some claimed it was a gift for the coming winter. Others whispered it was an invitation, or worse, a bargain. No one drank, not that night. By the time dawn's gray light seeped into Elderglen, the cups were gone. Not stolen, not spilled, just gone, leaving behind faint circles on the frost-dusted steps. And on every door, in the thinnest script you could imagine, scratched deep enough to feel but not to see unless you caught it in the right light, was a single word: stay. If you imagine a medieval queen as a sparkling, crown-wearing figure lounging in silk sheets while servants fanned her with peacock feathers, well, let's just say you've been tricked by paintings and bedtime stories. In reality, being a queen could be suffocating, isolating, and even downright dangerous. For starters, a queen's body wasn't really her own. The moment she was married, often as a teenager, her primary job became producing heirs, preferably sons. Court gossip swirled like smoke around her womb. If she wasn't pregnant within a year, whispers would begin. Was she barren? Was it the king's fault? Should she be replaced? Even when she was pregnant, there was no privacy. Ladies in waiting and midwives hovered constantly, and childbirth was terrifyingly risky. Death in childbirth was common, even for queens swaddled in gold. Then there was the political pressure. A queen was often a pawn in her husband's diplomatic games. She might be sent away from her homeland to marry a foreign king she had never met, surrounded by courtiers who saw her as an outsider. She had to smile, nod, and play the role of gracious hostess while navigating deadly court politics, where a wrong word could spark a feud or get her accused of treason. And about all those beautiful gowns? Yes, they were stunning, but also heavy, uncomfortable, and unwashed for long stretches. Wool and brocade could weigh more than a winter blanket. In summer heat, the layers were unbearable. And under it all, hygiene was medieval at best. Perfume and herbs were used to mask the smell, not soap and water. Even queens weren't free from strict rules about where they could go, who they could see, or how they could behave. Want to take a walk in the gardens alone? Forget it. Too dangerous. Every movement was observed, every friendship monitored. And if the king suspected infidelity, real or imagined, the consequences could be brutal. Public disgrace, banishment, even execution. One of the worst things? Loneliness. Surrounded by people but unable to trust most of them, a queen could be trapped in gilded isolation. Ladies in waiting reported everything to the king or rival factions. Letters home might be intercepted. Even her children could be taken from her for political reasons, raised by tutors and advisors who served the crown's interests more than the mother's. And while a peasant could at least grumble about their lot over a pint of ale at the tavern, a queen had to keep her smile plastered on, no matter how miserable she felt, because her face wasn't just hers. It was the face of the kingdom. When people imagine queens in the Middle Ages, they often picture them reclining on velvet cushions, sipping from golden goblets, and giving delicate orders to handmaidens. Reality? Much stranger, much less glamorous, and occasionally downright gross. If you thought childbirth was a private matter, think again. For many medieval queens, giving birth was a public spectacle, at least partially. Not stadium seating public, but the room would be full of witnesses, nobles, midwives, and even court officials, there to verify that the baby was indeed hers and therefore the rightful heir. Privacy? Forget it. The queen's body wasn't hers, it was the kingdom's baby-making machine. Queens wore layers upon layers of gowns, some weighing more than 30 pounds. Add in heavy crowns, jewel-encrusted belts, and long trains that dragged on filthy castle floors. And you had a walking health hazard. Tight-laced bodices could make breathing difficult, and the weight of all that fabric in summer heat? More than one queen fainted during court events. Sugar was an expensive luxury, and queens got lots of it. Medieval sugar wasn't refined, so it was gritty, sticky, in a cavity factory. Chronic toothaches, abscesses, and breath that could knock a squire off his horse were common even for royalty. Imagine smiling regally while your mouth feels like it's on fire. Queens often kept exotic animals gifted by foreign rulers, monkeys, parrots, even leopards. But some kept much stranger pets. Eleanor of Aquitaine supposedly had a tame falcon she took everywhere. Isabella of France was rumored to have a pet snake. These animals were status symbols, but also a mess to care for, especially when your monkey decided the royal banquet table was the perfect place to relieve itself. Royal jewels were recycled across generations, but they also carried whispers of curses. Some pieces were said to bring infertility, madness, or early death to the wearer. Queens wore them anyway, because refusing could insult the giver. Imagine sitting through dinner knowing the sapphire on your neck was rumored to kill its owner. While queens did bathe more than peasants, baths were rare events because heating that much water took forever. When it was finally bath time, they might soak in tubs lined with linen and scented herbs. But the same water could be reused by multiple people in the household in descending order of rank. By the time the lower ladies in waiting got their turn, the bath was less spa and more royal soup. They used crushed beetles for rouge, burnt almonds for eyeliner, and urine to bleach hair. Yes, urine. It was thought to make hair lighter and shinier. The most ambitious queens also tried mercury-based skin creams for radiance, which slowly poisoned them. A medieval queen almost never slept alone. Ladies in waiting shared her chamber, partly for protection, partly for gossip control, and partly to serve her in the night. Want a midnight snack? Someone had to fetch it. Need to pee? A servant held the chamber pot. Romance and privacy? Basically impossible. Taking you all back to the story, the fire in the hearth had begun to fade to a bed of glowing embers, casting long, wavering shadows across the walls of the chamber. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, carrying with it the distant howl of dogs from the lower village. Eleanor sat in her chair near the window, her thoughts drifting like smoke, though not entirely from her own choosing. The queen's mind, usually sharp, was weighed down by a lingering unease. Her ladies-in-waiting noticed it. Even the youngest, who usually busied herself gossiping about page boys, avoided her gaze. There had been a strange hush in the corridors since the messenger's arrival earlier that day. The man had handed Eleanor a folded piece of parchment sealed with black wax, a rare and ominous sign, and left without a word. She had opened it in private, eyes scanning the short, precise lines. It wasn't an accusation. Not yet. It was worse. Someone within her court claimed to have proof of a royal secret, and they would reveal it unless certain terms were met. That night, she couldn't keep still. She paced from the window to the fireplace, pausing only when the oldest of her attendants, Lady Brita, entered with a fresh pitcher of spiced wine. "You'll wear a rut in the floor, Your Grace," Brita muttered, setting down the pitcher. Her voice was low, cautious, the tone of someone who had survived long enough to know when a storm was coming. Eleanor sat, though her fingers still tapped against the armrest. "Do you ever feel," she began slowly, "that this castle listens more than it should? As if it keeps secrets, waiting for the right time to spit them out?" Brita's eyes darted briefly to the carved beam above the fireplace, as if checking for hidden ears. "Walls have mouths in places like this, my queen, and mouths have teeth." Later that night, as Eleanor finally lay in her bed, sleep did not come easily. The tapestries on the walls seemed to ripple in the flickering candlelight, and the sound of the wind outside began to twist into something else. Whispers, faint but deliberate. At first she thought she was imagining it, but then the whispering grew louder, more distinct, as though it was moving through the stone itself. She sat upright, straining to hear. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice, and it was saying her name. The queen's chambers had changed since the last time you peered in. Gone were the perfumed rushes scattered artfully on the floor. In their place, bundles of drying lavender hung from the beams, their scent mixing uneasily with something sharper. Vinegar, perhaps, used to ward off illness. A small fire burned low in the hearth, casting a trembling light over the room. It was quiet, almost too quiet. You moved closer to the heavy oak door, and that's when you caught it. A faint murmur. Not the confident, commanding voice she had used at court, but something softer, strained. The queen was speaking to someone you couldn't see, her tone somewhere between desperation and command. "And you will keep it hidden. No one must know," she whispered. The unseen figure, perhaps a lady-in-waiting, perhaps not, murmured in reply, the words lost to the crackle of the fire. You caught the shuffle of fabric, the rustle of parchment, and then, curiously, a sound like the clink of glass bottles. That was odd. Glass was rare, precious, something a queen might own, yes, but why keep it secret? Then a strange lull fell over the chamber. You expected the queen to leave, to dismiss her companion, but instead there was the creak of the bed frame. She sat, perhaps, or sank down with a weariness she never allowed anyone else to see. The crown that had always gleamed on her head, more a cage than a treasure, was gone now, replaced by a linen cap. Without the jewels and silks, she seemed almost human, though no less trapped. In the candlelight, the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to pulse and shift, as if alive. Was it just the flicker of the flames, or something else? You strained to hear, and there it was again, the faint sound of scratching, like claws against wood, from somewhere beneath the floor. The queen paused mid-sentence, clearly hearing it too. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. She rose, crossed the chamber with slow, deliberate steps, and knelt beside the hearth. You could just make out her hand slipping behind one of the bricks. A dull click, a hidden latch, and the panel shifted. She glanced over her shoulder, straight toward you. The morning broke over the castle with a haze of pale gold, the kind that softened the edges of the world and made even the coldest stones look warm. But inside, the queen's chambers were far from tranquil. A new rumor had slithered its way through the corridors during the night, one so absurd, so tantalizing that it was already being whispered by chambermaids, guards, and even the cooks stirring their morning porridge. They said someone had been seen slipping into the queen's private herb garden under moonlight. Not just anyone, but a figure dressed in a hooded cloak, moving with deliberate care, clipping small bundles of leaves and tucking them into a pouch. The strange part? The garden was locked at night, and the only key was kept under the queen's pillow. The queen, still in her embroidered nightgown and sipping a goblet of watered wine, listened as her lady-in-waiting recounted the tale, trying to mask her own fascination. Her fingers tapped lightly against the cup, an uncharacteristic show of nervousness. "Do you believe it?" the lady whispered. The queen gave her a sidelong glance. "I believe that in this castle, people will invent anything to make the hours pass faster." But her voice trailed off, as though she didn't quite believe her own dismissal. Breakfast that morning was no ordinary affair. The great hall, though filled with the clink of spoons against trenchers, felt strangely tense. Courtiers kept glancing at the queen, as though hoping to catch some flicker of guilt or defiance on her face. She responded with a regal serenity that was almost theatrical. Yet underneath, she was calculating. The truth was, the herb garden was her most private domain. Beyond rosemary and sage, it contained plants not found in any monastery's herbal records. Strange blossoms with curling petals, roots with the texture of old leather, seeds so bitter they could turn sweet wine sour. She used them not for poisons or spells, as some might believe, but for something far more secretive. And that secret was in danger. By midday, the queen had quietly summoned her most trusted guard, Sir Garin, a man whose loyalty was unshakable, but whose curiosity could be dangerous. She led him not to the garden itself, but to a narrow stairway that spiraled deep beneath the castle. The air grew damp, tinged with the scent of soil and stone. At the bottom lay a wooden door bound with iron bands, locked with a mechanism so intricate that even the castle's locksmith couldn't open it without the queen's guidance. Inside was a chamber lit only by flickering candles. Clay jars lined the walls, each sealed with wax and marked with symbols no one but the queen could read. In the center stood a small wooden table, and on it, a single silver cup, half filled with a thick green liquid. "This," she said quietly, "is why I will never be the queen they think I am." Before Sir Garin could ask what she meant, a faint noise echoed from somewhere above. Footsteps, muffled but urgent. The queen's eyes sharpened. "Someone's coming," she whispered. The question now was, were they coming for her or for what she guarded? Snow whispered against the castle's stone walls as the queen paced in her private solar, her velvet skirts dragging across the cold rush-covered floor. The fire had died down to a sullen glow, casting long, crooked shadows across the carved oak panels. Somewhere in the corridors beyond, a servant's footsteps echoed, light, hurried, and a little too anxious, as if carrying news best left untold. The queen's hand lingered on the sill of the narrow window. Below, the courtyard looked serene under its winter blanket, but there was an odd absence. No laughter from the stable boys, no clanging from the blacksmith's forge. It felt staged, like the world had drawn a heavy curtain over something it didn't want her to see. Then came the faint chime, not the soft music of her chapel bells, but a single deliberate note, metallic and low, as though struck on purpose in some hidden part of the keep. She turned, her pearl crown tilting ever so slightly. In the far corner, her maid Eleanor was pretending to mend a tear in the queen's ermine mantle, but the queen noticed her hands weren't moving. Eleanor's gaze was fixed somewhere past the queen, just over her shoulder. The queen froze. "What is it?" she asked softly. Eleanor blinked, forced a clumsy smile, and shook her head. "Nothing, my lady." But it wasn't nothing. From the corridor came a muffled voice, deep, deliberate, speaking a phrase in a language the queen didn't recognize. It rolled like gravel in the throat, an old tongue, older than the castle itself. The hairs on her arms rose. She glanced again at Eleanor, who was now white as snow. The queen moved toward the door, each step slow and deliberate. the way one approaches a sleeping beast. When she pulled it open, the corridor was empty, but a thin trail of melted snow led away, each footprint strangely narrow, as if left by someone barefoot in the dead of winter. And then, something caught her eye. On the wall above the tapestry of St. Margaret was a mark. It hadn't been there yesterday. A black smear, almost a handprint, except the fingers were far too long. She did not call the guards. Somehow she knew they wouldn't see it. She closed the door and turned back into her chamber, but the fire was roaring again, though she had not touched it. And in the hearth, among the flames, sat a single object, her father's signet ring, the one buried with him 3 winters ago. The frost-cracked courtyard lay silent under a pale winter sun as the Queen's ladies clustered in the shadow of the keep, their whispers curling like smoke into the brittle air. Somewhere high above in the drafty solar, the Queen herself sat at her embroidery frame. Though her needle moved without care, her mind far from the silken threads. She had been uneasy ever since the messenger arrived with his strangely folded letter, sealed in wax so dark it almost looked black. The letter had no crest, no signature, only a line written in a looping hand. The walls have ears, and the floorboards remember. It had unsettled her in a way even battle news never did. She was used to enemies on the field. She could see them, outmaneuver them. But enemies who crept unseen through her halls? That was another thing entirely. A log popped in the hearth, sending sparks scuttling up the flue, and she glanced toward the door. A servant girl, not one of hers, she noted, lingered in the shadows with a tray of honeyed wine. The girl's eyes were downcast, her curtsy deep. But there was something wrong about her stillness. Down in the great hall, the day's meal was being prepared, the smell of roasting venison mixing with the sharp bite of onion and leeks. Outside the kitchens, a scullion knelt to scrub a spill of ale and noticed a small, dark stain beneath the rushes that did not smell of drink at all. By the time the first bells rang for dinner, the castle's atmosphere had shifted. Conversations grew hushed. Glances darted over shoulders. The Queen descended in her heavy mantle, the fur collar brushing her chin, every step echoing on the stone like a drumbeat. A bard began to play in the corner, a lilting, cheerful tune, but his fingers trembled just slightly over the strings, and every so often his eyes flicked toward the high table, as though expecting something. And then, as the servants poured the wine, a single goblet was set before the Queen. Not gold like the rest, but silver. She noticed. She smiled, but she did not drink. The snow outside the Queen's private solar had begun to fall in strange, slanted flurries, as though the wind was trying to whisper secrets through the cracks in the stone walls. She sat by the hearth, wrapped in layers of fur-lined velvet, the flames casting long shadows across the intricate tapestries behind her. At first glance, it seemed like any other winter night in the castle, warm, still, and quiet. But something was off. Her maid, Elswith, had been acting nervous all evening, dropping things, glancing toward the door, as if listening for footsteps that never came. Even the Queen's greyhound, normally sprawled lazily by the fire, kept lifting his head to stare into the dark corners of the room. The atmosphere wasn't threatening exactly, more like the castle itself was holding its breath. Dinner had been odd, too. The roast venison had tasted faintly metallic, and the Queen had noticed that the royal taster had lingered just a fraction longer than usual before nodding for her to eat. It wasn't the first time she'd suspected subtle games were afoot. Being Queen was less about jewels and ballads than about reading between the silences. And then there was the matter of the mirror, a tall, warped thing imported from Venice. It stood in the far corner of her solar. She'd owned it for years, but tonight, when she glanced at it, the reflection didn't match her movements exactly. It lagged, just a heartbeat behind, as though some unseen hand was sketching her in real time. The Queen leaned back, her fingers tightening on the armrests. Somewhere in the tower above her chambers, a bell rang softly. Not the chapel bell, but a smaller one, used only when someone entered the hidden stairwell from the lower floors. She smiled faintly. Whoever it was, they had no idea she was already 3 steps ahead. The candlelight trembled as if it feared what lay ahead, casting restless shadows along the queen's bedchamber walls. Outside, the wind clawed at the shutters, though the night was otherwise still. She sat alone at her vanity, the silver mirror before her clouded as though it were breathing. Her ladies had been dismissed hours ago, yet she swore she could hear the faint rustle of skirts brushing the floor behind her. Every time she turned, the space was empty. Only the flutter of the tapestry depicting her great-grandmother's coronation, swaying gently though there was no draft. Her great-grandmother, Queen Isabel, had been whispered about for generations, beloved by the people, feared by the court. The tale went that she never truly left the castle, that her spirit, bound by an oath, wandered the corridors in search of something stolen from her grave. The queen tried to ignore it, focusing on her jewels laid neatly across the table. Yet one ring, a thick gold band with a dark garnet, was not hers. She had never seen it before. When she reached for it, the air grew cold, her breath fogging the glass. From the corner of the mirror, a faint figure emerged, not behind her, but within the reflection itself. A woman in ancient robes, her crown crooked, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. She mouthed words the queen could not hear. The queen's heart thudded. She whispered, "What do you want?" The figure in the mirror tilted her head, the same way a predator might size up prey. Then slowly the reflection's hand lifted and pointed, not to the queen, but to the bed behind her. She turned. The sheets were perfectly smooth, untouched, but on the pillow lay another object, a tarnished iron key, cold enough to sting her fingers. Somewhere deep beneath the castle, a door was waiting. Do you want me to take the next part straight into her descent into the castle's hidden levels? Or first show the unsettling signs that the rest of the court is starting to notice something is wrong? The queen gripped the iron key, its chill seeping into her bones as if it had been resting in the grave all these centuries. She turned back to the mirror, but the apparition of Queen Isabel was gone. Only her own pale, startled face stared back. That night she could not sleep. The wind howled, the tapestry shivered, and when the first bell of dawn tolled, she found herself walking without thought, her bare feet carrying her through winding corridors she had never explored. The key fit the lock of a narrow door behind the chapel altar. The hinges groaned open to a spiral staircase descending into the earth. She followed, the air growing damp, the stones slick beneath her fingers. At the bottom waited a small chamber, lit by a single candle that had no wax to burn from. In its glow rested a coffin of blackened oak. The queen approached and found the lid already cracked. Inside lay bones draped in the faded remnants of royal robes. And on the skeletal hand, its fingers curled as if still guarding it, was the matching garnet ring to the one upstairs. She slid it from the bones, meaning to return it to the vanity. But the moment the ring left the finger, the coffin lid slammed shut, the candle winked out, and in the pitch dark, a voice whispered against her ear, "Now, it's your turn." The next morning, the queen's bedchamber stood empty, the sheets untouched, save for the iron key lying neatly on the pillow. My dear friend, if you are hearing my voice now, then you have stayed with me, patiently, through a long journey tonight. You have walked with me through shadowed halls, candlelit chambers, and the soft whisper of ancient walls. You have listened to the rustle of forgotten silks, the distant toll of bells, the sigh of the wind across a sleeping kingdom. And for that, I thank you from the very depths of my heart. Because time, your time, is the most precious gift you can give to another. You could have spent these hours elsewhere, in noise, in distraction, in the many restless corners of the modern world, but instead you chose to stay here, in this quiet corner, to share in a story that may never be told in quite this way again. I want you to know, I felt you here with me, even though we may be separated by miles, oceans, and perhaps even by years. Still, there is something about storytelling, something ancient and human, that bridges all of that. There is an invisible fire between us, and tonight we sat around it together. We wandered through moments that were sometimes eerie, sometimes tender, sometimes strange. We saw courage, We felt fear. We witnessed the way time leaves its mark on stone and spirit alike. But what matters most is not the story itself, but the journey we took through it together. You have been patient, far more patient than most people are asked to be in today's world. Every minute you have given here has been an act of stillness. And stillness is something rare, something beautiful, something that nourishes both the mind and the soul. I know that for some of you, this patience has not come easily. Perhaps you have had a long day. Perhaps your thoughts are busy, chasing tomorrow's worries. Perhaps your heart is carrying something heavy that words cannot quite touch. And yet, you have stayed. You have allowed your breathing to slow. You have let the rhythm of the story guide you, not rushing to the end, but letting each moment arrive in its own time. Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the secret misery of being a medieval queen, the part Hollywood forgot to mention because, endless suffering doesn't sell as well as sparkly tiaras. Forget the sweeping gowns, the castle banquets, and the handsome knights who apparently have nothing better to do than gaze at you all day. The truth? Being a queen in the Middle Ages was less royal fairy tale and more glorified prisoner in a drafty stone Airbnb with zero heating, no privacy, and political murder as a common workplace hazard. So before you imagine yourself waltzing through a candlelit hall, hit that like button, subscribe for more historical reality checks, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from so I can see which one of you would have frozen first in a 14th century castle. Now dim the lights, grab a blanket, trust me you'll need it, and let's jump in. You wake up, not in a king-size bed in fact, not even in your own bed half the time, because queens were often moved around for security or political reasons. The sheets, rough wool, itchy as your aunt's holiday sweater. The room smells like, well, a combination of unwashed stone, stale rushes on the floor, and the faint whiff of last night's chamber pot. Oh, and no, you don't get to leave whenever you want. You're technically the most important woman in the realm, but also the most valuable hostage. Congratulations. And before breakfast, you're already under surveillance. Maids, ladies in waiting, and a couple of suspicious guards all watching, all reporting back to someone. Imagine living with your own personal group chat, except instead of memes, they're sharing every move you make with the king's advisors. You're thinking pancakes? Nope. Welcome to bread that could double as a weapon, cold ale, maybe a hunk of cheese if you're lucky. Proud of that. Because in choosing to slow down, you have given yourself a gift. In these hours together, you have not only heard a tale, you have also practiced the art of resting the mind. You have allowed yourself to step out of the constant current of demands, screens, noise, and urgency, and you have stepped into a softer space, where imagination and rest meet, where the heart can breathe a little more freely. I am honored, truly honored, that you chose to make this space with me. You see, stories have always been more than just entertainment. They are bridges between souls. In the old days, people would gather in firelight, much as you and I have gathered here in the glow of sound. The storyteller would speak, and the listeners would lean in, letting the world beyond the fire grow quiet, letting the words paint shapes in the air. The silences between the words would be just as important as the words themselves. And in that shared listening, people felt connected, not just to each other, but to something far older, far deeper. Tonight, I feel that same connection with you. So let me say this, clearly and from the center of my heart. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your trust. Thank you for walking this path beside me. I know the hours have been long. I know the pace has been slow, deliberate, unhurried. And yet you stayed. You listened. You let the story unfold in its own rhythm. That is rare. That is beautiful. And I am grateful. Now, my friend, your journey for tonight is almost over. You have followed the queen through the final door. You have heard the last whisper in the dark. The story has reached its quiet close. And now it is your turn to rest. I want you to imagine, just for a moment, that you are still in that ancient castle. The torches have burned low. The corridors are empty. The world beyond the windows is hushed beneath a silver moon. Somewhere far away, the last echoes of footsteps fade into silence. And in that stillness, you find your own room, warm, safe, waiting for you. You lay down. The blankets feel soft and heavy. The pillow cradles your head, and the air is cool against your skin. Somewhere, not too far away, a gentle, soulful music begins to play. It is a song without words, only the language of strings, of soft harmonies, of notes that drift like clouds across the night sky. It is music that carries no urgency, no demand, only a quiet invitation. Rest now. That is what is waiting for you next. A full 30 minutes of peaceful, soulful music, chosen and created with care to help you drift into sleep. I want you to let it wash over you like a tide. Let it move through your thoughts, smoothing away the edges of the day. Let it gather the worries in your mind and carry them off into the dark, leaving only a calm, open space inside you. And if your thoughts try to return, if they try to bring you back into planning, into remembering, into wondering, just return your attention to the music. Let it hold you the way a lullaby once held you when you were small. Let it rock you gently in its rhythm. Tonight, you do not need to do anything. You do not need to solve anything. You do not need to be anywhere but here. For 30 minutes, you will be surrounded by sound that was made for you. Sound that carries a kind of kindness within it. Sound that wants nothing but your rest. So as we part for now, know this. I am deeply grateful that you joined me. I am proud of the patience you have given. And I hope as you listen to the music that you feel cared for. Not just by me, but by the story itself. By the ancient, unseen threads that connect us through time and imagination. The world will be here when you wake. The tasks, the thoughts, the responsibilities, they can wait. Tonight is for you. Tonight is for stillness. Tonight is for rest. So close your eyes, take a slow breath in, let it out. Feel your body grow heavier with each exhale. The music is waiting now, ready to carry you wherever dreams begin. Thank you, my dear friend. Sleep well, sleep deeply, and when you wake, may you wake with a lighter heart. Good night.